Welcome to another episode of B2B Startup Growth. I'm Sean McHouse, and in this podcast, I aim to share with you wisdom from some of the smartest B2B startup leaders and professionals that I know. We talk about all aspects of marketing, sales, growth hacking, life hacking, and everything in between. Hello, Rebecca. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you? Good afternoon.
So happy to have you with me. So before we start, I'd like you to introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. I am a strategist at Penguin, and I also run my own B2B marketing consulting company called The Lean Marketer. And I work with companies large and small that need B2B marketing.
Okay, and I'll also say that Rebecca is one of the smartest marketers that I've ever had the privilege of working with. And I love working with you, Rebecca. You probably know that.
Thank you. Likewise.
And also specifically, when I thought of who could I talk to about how to hire marketers for a B2B tech startup, I can't think of many people who would be wiser on this topic. So I'm so happy that you agreed to join me on this discussion. So
thank you.
Let's jump on it. So I thought the first question I'd ask you is, if you're a tech startup, and let's say you're past the stage where you have no idea what you're going to be selling. Okay, so you're already past product market fit. You have a product, you've sold it to a few people, a few clients. Let's say you're already a company. You're past that stage that you're just a couple of founders in a garage. So you're already at a stage where you've raised some money, and you've given the investors some promises of growth, and now you're putting together your first real marketing campaigns, marketing team, marketing activity to do customer acquisition. Where should you start with hiring?
Okay. Well, you've given a very good set of initial conditions, and I still have to answer that it depends. What does it depend on? It depends on, first of all, how marketing oriented are the founders? Because if one or more of your founders has a good marketing sense, then you could probably get away with hiring somebody who's a little bit more earlier stage in their career, and they can be mentored by the founder potentially, or it can be like a cooperative activity between this new hire and the founder. If you've got founders who just really have no clue about marketing, that is, usually they have a clue about their product and engineering and all that good stuff, then you probably need to hire somebody who's got a lot more experience. Then the issue becomes, is somebody super experienced going to be even interested in coming to a tiny little startup at the beginning of their journey? And what type of, and by the way, it's not necessarily just because of salary consideration, but also budget. Like, what kind of budget can you offer them to work with? Will they be able to hire a team to work with them and use outsource agencies or freelancers or whatever to accomplish their marketing goals? So, you need to have a sense of what you're trying to accomplish with your company. Like, what are your goals for the coming 6 to 12 months? I would say at least 12 months, probably, because you're not going to hire somebody for 6 months. And you may need, in order to determine what those goals are, you might need to actually work with an experienced marketer, whether that's on an outsource basis or a person on your advisory board, or maybe somebody from one of your VCs that you really trust, somebody who has a sense, who's been through it before, to help you build that plan, or at least an initial sense of what you need. And that'll really determine who you need to hire.
I love that. So you know what? I might even be able to offer some, help to somebody who is at that stage where they're trying to put together their, 12-month plan ahead. I've put together a resource which is an example of a marketing budget for startups that are at the stage of, let's say, something in the order of having a monthly budget of around $1 million for the year and up, meaning million to a few $1 million for a whole year of marketing and sales budget. if you're at that stage, if you are at that level of spending, I have a template for you that you can use. You can look it up in the B2B startupgrowth.com website. You can download it there, and that would give you like a checklist of the line items that you might need to hire for, spend on, and make sure that you cover if it's needed for achieving your goals, right? So the first line in that plan is the CMO. And that's one of the biggest questions. You touched on it a little bit. I want to ask you further. Let's say, and often I find that the companies, the founders are at the stage where they think, okay, now is this time to grow fast. And what we want to hire now at this stage, now we just got our round A of money. Let's say we just raised $10 million. Okay. Now we can hire this big shot CMO. Okay. This is what they often look for. By the way, if it's an Israeli startup, often they say, okay, now let's get big shot CMO that's been there, done that in the US, that's lives in the Silicon Valley or somewhere, or in New York, and they've been there, they've done similar stuff already, and they'll come and build our marketing. How do you hire that kind of big shot?
How do I hire, or do I recommend hiring?
Okay, so both questions. When or do you recommend hiring that big shot?
Look, at some point,
If you do, for the cases that you do, how do you do it?
Okay, so at some point you're going to need a big shot who can wow the analysts, who can speak at all the industry conferences, who can sit in on sales meetings and really tell the story and not look like somebody who's just earlier on in their career, or who's more of a backstage support type marketing person. Eventually you will need somebody like that. I will say that I've seen too many times startups rushing into hiring these big shot CMOs, and then they crash and burn, either because they're not given the budget that they need, or the rest of the management team doesn't really have any idea what the role of that person needs to be or should be. A lot of times these people, and I mean, I'm obviously generalizing because there are exceptions, but many times if the person qualifies as a big shot, then they're used to being a big shot. They're used to conducting the orchestra of the marketing. And they're not used to actually rolling up their sleeves and playing an instrument. And usually what you need at the early stage is somebody who can roll up their sleeves and do that, or at least has the understanding of what it means to roll up their sleeves so that they can properly supervise somebody or properly hire somebody who can do all of those things. Most startups at the stage that you described earlier in our conversation are not at that stage yet. But that's not to say that they don't need to hire somebody who might be at the level of a VP marketing or a CMO. They just need to clarify that person needs to also have hands-on abilities. Now, it's usually not somebody who's been managing a team of 30 people, right? That's usually not a good culture fit, or coming from a very, very large company. Unless it's somebody for whom this is, a huge personal passion of theirs. They might come in at the level of a co-founder, let's say. I think that's a really different story. I've seen co-founders of companies that came from a marketing role, and they took on the CMO role as part of their co-founding responsibilities. And honestly, that works amazingly, because usually what you have is somebody who's more marketing and business oriented and somebody else who's more technology oriented. And then, with that combination, you can totally fly. There's a lot of trust between the two partners, et cetera. But hiring in somebody like that at a fairly early stage, I would caution against it.
So I loved what you said, because see, the most common situation in this regard that I meet is that, besides from the fact that if there's two co-founders, as you said, that complement each other this way, it is ideal. I agree with you. But if that's not the case, and in most cases that I meet, they come to us and there's the founding team is very technologically, with very strong technological background, and then they're looking for the marketer. And the common situation is this: they're looking for this ideal profile of a CMO that has, the right domain knowledge, the right experience with taking a company from their stage to the next stage, with the right connections, with the right industry leaders that they've already been, engaging with, blah, blah, blah. You have a whole list of perfect requirements of that person.
Mm-hmm.
And then they say, okay, that's what we want to hire. And it just takes forever and ever and ever to find such a person. And that the person is either that person doesn't exist, or
right, could be,
or they exist, but then to bring them in, it takes a lot. It means they've already done this and that. Now for them, to take on this job again would require either that you compensate them hugely, or either with equity, you have to sell yourself like as if they were an investor. It's sometimes more difficult to do that than to get a big investment, because you actually need to get the CMO to be bought into your potential, just like an investor.
Right.
So my recommendation more often than not, is that you don't start out with a big shot CMO. I think what we call the big shot CMO will come later as you scale more. And in the beginning, what you would want to do is start with people who know how to do the groundwork and consult with some people that are very experienced to make sure that you're shooting in the right directions.
Right. So, I agree. I also think that you mentioned consulting with people. I mean, this can be on an informal basis, on a formal basis. It can even be formalized to the point where instead of hiring that big shot in-house, you invite them to be on your advisory board, let's say.
Right.
And there are many people who are highly qualified and who would be willing to spend, 10 to 15 hours a month, let's say, giving your company advice and opening doors and helping guide you along the way, but aren't going to be willing to spend, a couple hundred hours a month or more.
Right.
Since we know startup life is demanding.
Right. So assuming you understand that you need somebody to manage digital marketing and to build your customer acquisition, the digital part of it, do you have any ideas of how effectively to screen for such a job and to make sure you got the right person?
Well, first of all, I think you need to accept already at the beginning that digital marketing is something that's constantly changing. So you need somebody who, even if it seems like, they know everything, which is hard to find in the first place because there's lots of different channels and lots of different types of ways of going about generating leads through digital. But let's say they know everything that there is to know today. But you also need to make sure that it's somebody who is open to learning new techniques and who maybe will, who can learn and who can adjust as time goes on. Because even if they've done it all before, there's always something different, or there's always a different challenge. It's more of a question of how they solve a mystery, how they get to the bottom of what's working or what's not working, and not necessarily, I've run this amazing campaign on Quora before, or whatever. Fill in blank here. Run this amazing campaign on Facebook. I mean, okay. It's totally possible to run an amazing campaign on Facebook or LinkedIn and still not do a great job for a particular company. I was speaking with one company the other day, and they said they knew I'd worked with another company that was really similar to them in terms of their technology, right? They're targeting similar customers. And they said they wanted to know exactly what the first company had done because they wanted to copy it. And I said, well, first of all, I don't necessarily want to share every detail, but second of all, even if I did, who's to say that it's going to work for you? And then when I learned a little bit more about the stage that the company is at and the fact that they had certain amazing customers that were willing to give testimonials, which this first company didn't have at the time when they started marketing, I said, well, we should actually work with that and do a completely different strategy. And also they're very vertically oriented. The first one was very general and they target lots of different vertical markets. So, I mean, there's always differences. I guess to get back to your question is you need to find somebody who can really get into the heads of the customers, what they need, what's going to trigger them to click, to download something, to request a demo, etc., and who's not going to give up if the first thing they try doesn't work. Okay. And there's also a lot of different pieces to digital marketing. There's the technical aspect of actually placing the ads or doing inbound activities. There's the creative, there's the content, there's the timing, there's the budgets, managing the budgets, there's the analytics, understanding what's going on after you've run a campaign or while you're running a campaign, and then changing things while you're doing it. You need somebody who can do all of those things.
Right. So I would claim that most people that I meet are not great at all of the pieces, because there's really lots of pieces. Mm-hmm. In fact, if I'm at this moment just looking through the list that I made for that budget template that you can download, and I see, for example, I listed here 13 different sort of professions that you have to have covered in order to do standard, just a standard digital marketing. Right. So some people can cover a few of them themselves, hands-on. Other people can cover, I think there are very, very few people in the world who could cover all of them well. Usually you have to choose what is most important to you. Mm-hmm. So I guess you could, if I just name the list for just, quickly, so that the listeners of the podcast don't have this in front of their eyes, other than the one that's doing the high level planning of the digital marketing. And there's somebody who's doing the product marketing. There's the sales and business development kind of activity. There is the SDR activity, which is, the reaching out, the calling of prospects that are not yet in the bottom of the funnel, like very top of the funnel kind of interaction. Of course, there's the content writing. There's the social marketing, all the posting and strategizing around how to get in front of people through the social networks, the email marketing, the design side, all the visual branding side, the copy brand side, the website development, the SEO side, the PPC, all the paid campaign management and optimization, all the PR, the media, and the public relations. So this is just to name a few of the topics, right?
Just a few.
Just a few. It's not all of it. So of course, I guess that when a startup is deciding who to hire, they first need to decide which of these that I mentioned are most important to them. So sometimes the founders will know that in advance, and sometimes they even will need the marketer in order to choose which is most important for them. Right? So let me ask you, so let me jump to the next step. So let's say that they looked it through the list, and the founders of the company, or even if there's already somebody on the top of marketing there, they've figured out some, go-to market, and they know that one of the fundamental pieces that they really need is really high-level content writing for themselves. From the writing, of course, they'll be producing video content and infographic content, all kinds of things, but there needs to be foundational writing. This is often a big challenge, especially companies who are selling technology that is not trivial to write about. Can you recommend how to go about hiring the talent that writes for you when you're a tech company?
Sure. Having hired many, many writers in my time, I usually start by asking for samples. Sometimes I even ask for specific types of samples, like, send me a press release on a blog post or a campaign that you've written for social media, etc., depending again on what I'm looking for. And you're going to find that different writers have different areas that they're better at or worse at. So some are really great with long form content, like white papers and ebooks. Others are better at short form or medium form content, like blog posts, press releases. And others are amazing at writing the perfect headline, the perfect tweet, that kind of thing. That's really, or like micro copy, right? So, and not every writer can do every type of writing. Some people are more formal. Some people are more, kind of familiar, friendly, that kind of thing. A lot of it depends on the tone that you want to take with your company. That's usually one of the questions I ask companies when I'm helping them develop their brand and their brand language is what's the tone? Are you more friendly? Are you more formal? So I usually start with asking for samples. And then I also oftentimes will give a short test and I think the test, again, should be something along the lines of what you would need written for your company, although it's not something that you would necessarily actually use for your company because that's not ethical unless you're paying the person
No,
for their work.
You know what? I would suggest here that we often give a test, but paid for it. We pay for it. The test is an item, and I can give you the advice that I can give you here is that when you're trying to qualify a writer, they realize that you're not sure that they would be good enough. Their writing is a good match for the company. So they would be often willing to write for a low price because you both are assuming mutual risk, right?
Right.
So you agree on some kind of item that's appropriate for your needs, but you're not sure that the writer will do it well enough. So you agree on a price that's kind of in the middle between them volunteering a little bit to do an effort. On the other hand, they're not working for free. So you and then you give them an assignment which is real. I find that more useful than looking at their sample work even. Because often the challenge here is that when you get samples of work, the writer will give you samples of things that they have written, but you never know what part of the item was really originally 100% done by them, or was it really good because the subject matter expert fed them so well, gave them the structure, and all they did was just put nice words around it. So you never know which part of the writing they did. Or maybe they were brilliant in putting together content and they gave somebody else to edit it for final polish. So you don't know from the sample.
Right. No, I totally agree. And by the way, sometimes it's okay to hire a writer who may not be able to polish it to the last dot, right? But they're great at telling a story, so you're willing to make that compromise and
exactly
know that you'll always have to have somebody edit it just to make sure there's no grammatical errors or something like that. But
you know what? I actually find that more often than not, if the company's content needs to be highly technical, it's nearly impossible sometimes to find somebody who writes really beautifully, really, really well, and also is an expert on the domain, the technological domain. So what is often needed is a team of a few people that are putting together the content, which one part, brings the expertise, the domain expertise, and another part brings the writing expertise.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Okay. That is a big challenge. And yes, it's, do you have any specific places where you go and seek writers online?
I'm always looking for writers. I mean, everywhere. So I've found that some journalists will also do marketing writing on the side. I mean, it's much more lucrative for them to write for a company than to write for a publication. So if I really love somebody's writing and they're in a domain that I know is a good fit, then I might reach out to them.
Yeah, I love that advice. I find that really useful. Yeah.
I also love to hire people who've studied journalism because usually that means that they have learned that writing is not necessarily about the perfect word, but it's about churning out the content on a deadline and that you can always rewrite and edit it after that. So I do find that people who are trained in journalism are most often, not always, but I guess very often they're good hires for me.
I love that advice. The deadline thing often is overlooked, and I agree with you that is so critical for success of marketing campaigns. Yeah. So much more important to get it done than to get it perfect.
Right. And I think that a lot of times somebody who's coming more from, let's say, the creative side may be used to spending a lot of time on really perfecting the content. And again, sometimes it calls for that. Sometimes the project calls for that, but most of the time in marketing, it doesn't. And look, I do a lot of writing myself. And sometimes I'll just say, okay, I've just got to get this out onto the page. And I'll just sort of spill it onto the page. And then I set it aside for a few hours or even a day or two. And usually when I come back to it, I'm like, oh, I have to read this horrible thing I wrote. And then I read it and I'm like, you know what? It's not really that bad. And then I take the raw material that I put out there on the page and I can rearrange it and edit it. And in the end, you get something that's really great. But if I hadn't just forced myself to start typing, it would have never gotten written. So I think we need to find that capability in the people we hire that they're willing to not be perfect. I think that that's an important aspect.
Right. But just as important is also people that would be aware of what is the minimal quality level that you can't release
Of
below.
course. Right. Of course. I'm not saying, you want to hire a fourth grader and use their material.
Of course. Yeah. And that is always that's always really a really interesting and important challenge, how to balance between the quality and the pace of engaging with your audience.
Mm-hmm. I do think, by the way, coming back to your question about where to hire, there's also a lot of groups of freelance writers, whether it's in your area regionally, geographically, or even outside, because writing can be done from anywhere. You can find them on LinkedIn, on Facebook. And again, you need to find a writer who, if somebody's, let's say, posted like, oh, I'm looking for new clients. The first thing I'll do is ask them, okay, well, what types of clients? Because sometimes you'd be surprised. You find, I'm an academic editor. Okay, well, that's not really relevant for what I'm looking for. But sometimes you find good people that way.
Okay, good. Let's assume that the core of your marketing team includes somebody who's taking care of the digital marketing and the content. And now you also need to cover, to some extent, like most startups do need today, some extent managing some paid advertising, managing SEO, managing events. Those are types of efforts that more often than not in a startup don't require a full-time person. But on the other hand, those are also things that often difficult for that one marketer to cover on their own because it require very specific expertise. So tell me, from your experience, what is your recommendation to do about those, about paid campaigns, about SEO and about events? Or maybe we should separate that, SEO and paid, and then about events.
I was going to I would say that paid campaigns and SEO, I would actually put that under digital marketing and customer acquisition. Whether or not the person you've hired has the capability or the time to manage that hands-on is a question. Most often, I see those types of activities outsourced simply because they do require, first of all, PPC, paid campaigns, really requires you to be on it all the time and monitoring it and tweaking it and that kind of thing. And for somebody who's got a lot of different responsibilities, a lot of times it can be too much, but not necessarily. And then on SEO, it's something also that's just changing so much that it's hard to stay on top of exactly what Google is doing these days, or algorithms and that kind of thing. So a lot of times those types of activities are outsourced. But again, not always. I mean, I've seen it in both directions. A lot of it just depends on how many hours in the day your digital marketer has to devote to it, as well as whether they have the expertise to do it and to do it well.
So do you have any advice to people who are not sure how much they should put on paid campaigns at this stage of their startup? Okay, let's say that they're a company, they just raised around their A round, and they're not sure, should we do paid or should we not do paid? To what extent should we do it? Do you have any advice on how to decide on that?
Well, it all depends on what type of company you are and how much your product costs, what's the your ideal customer looks like where are they online? Where is it going to be easy for you to find them online, or is it going to be a huge challenge? And how much are you willing to spend per opportunity? Like basically, what's your cost of acquisition for each customer? And you won't necessarily know if paid campaigns are going to be good value for you until you try it. I'm a big proponent of paid campaigns, and I think you can learn a lot from them in terms of which of your calls to action are most compelling, what are the messages that are most compelling, that kind of thing. So that's more of kind of like a marketing testing phase. Right. But I also think that beyond that, it helps you to scale up your efforts.
Right.
So if you have the budget to do it, I would say I would say go for it. But on the other hand, if you find that it's not working, or let's say you don't have the infrastructure in place to even deal with the leads that are coming in, which I've also seen, by the way. I've seen great digital marketers that bring in leads and then the SDRs don't really know what to do with them, or they don't have, they're not reaching out to them quickly enough so that the leads get stale by the time somebody reaches them, let's say, or they didn't put into a process of nurturing for the leads afterwards. So, I mean, there's a lot of different pieces to running a paid campaign versus an organic campaign, let's say, just general inbound marketing, inbound content-based inbound marketing. So do I think it's valuable for a startup? Yeah, I do. I think it's really valuable. I think that it needs to be done in a measured way, where you're keeping track of what you're doing, what's your goal for the campaign, did you achieve the goal, why or why not, and then take it from there. And if you see that it's working and your cost of acquisition is reasonable in relation to the price of your product, let's say, how much revenue it's going to generate, then double down, triple down. If it's not, then try something else.
Yeah. Well, I would just add to that significant investment in paid digital marketing, paid media, used to be something that you would consider doing if you couldn't get the free traffic or the free leads, free being not really free, but free of organic. As of today, beginning of 2020, the reality of the changes in the social networks, mainly, LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook, is that if you don't pay something for your content to be shown, it will be shown only to very, very limited number of people. So to a minimal level, you today, unfortunately, have to do paid. Okay. So I would add, but that doesn't mean that the limited doesn't require necessarily, a whole person specializing in it. Of course, it can be minor that your digital marketer takes care of. But if you need to do more extensive work on paid, then you would need a person to be really focused on it. Yes, I agree. And what do you say about events? I mean,
I think events are really, they're a cornerstone of B2B. I think that even though they've fallen out of fashion a little bit, there's usually one or two key events for each industry. Of course, your challenge is to figure out which of the events those are. And there's something really powerful in meeting people face to face in an environment where you can demonstrate your product, where they can potentially meet with other customers who are already using it. It can be much more powerful than just, a click on your website, let's say. So I'm also a big proponent of events, but of course, events done right, you need to plan for them. It's not just a question of showing up and setting up your pop-up booth and hoping people will come. It's reaching out to people beforehand. It's doing the right type of paid campaigns before, during, and after the event, setting up your nurturing and your follow-up after the event, making sure to have a compelling offer while you're there so that people will actually come and meet you.
So would you recommend to hire somebody who takes care of events solely? Well,
no.
I guess the answer is it depends on the capacity and the amount of events that you're doing yearly. But usually,
you would need a lot of events to warrant dedicating a full-time person to that.
Right. If you only do it, we have 2 big events a year. Would you recommend that somebody external will be hired to manage that, or do you recommend that
if you're doing
manages it?
If you're doing a traditional startup type 10 by 10 booth or kiosk in the Israel Export Institute or whatever, then you definitely don't need somebody to manage that for you. What you do need, though, is to get your office manager or admin on board to handle all the logistical aspects. And if you don't have that, then maybe you do need somebody outside. But I do think there's a lot of marketing aspects that need to be handled either by your marketing team, or if your team is too swamped, then you can outsource aspects of it, maybe building up the strategy for the event, helping do outreach before or during the event. I usually, if I'm not working with a PR, if the startup, let's say, doesn't have a PR company, and there's going to be a lot of journalists and analysts at the event, then I would recommend hiring at least somebody on a freelance basis to make sure that every single one of those journalists and analysts knows that your company is going to be there, tries to set up meetings for you. Meetings with potential customers is also really crucial. So.
That is a golden tip, Rebecca. I know that I've noticed a lot of companies who overlook this. So this is really important.
Okay.
If you're making such an effort to go to an event, then you might as well make the most out of it. So I think, Rebecca, we're kind of running out of time, although I'm sure that you could go on and tell us more such valuable tips. I really appreciate your inputs so far. And to close this session, I'd like to ask you my closing question that I ask all of my interviewees. And that is, if you're reflecting back on some of the best CMOs or CROs that you've seen so far, can you point out any specific practice or characteristic that they have, which is a major key for their success? Not necessarily on the topic that we discussed today.
Okay. Let me think for a second. I think that because marketing is such a multifaceted discipline, and also one that many people think they understand even if they don't, one of the most important aspects or characteristics of a really good CMO is the ability to prioritize. Because if you're dealing with all of the different, 13 different areas that you mentioned, and it wasn't even necessarily complete, you're not going to be able to do all of them at once. You need to figure out which are the ones that are most important. You need to plan. You need to follow through on the plan. And you also need a certain amount of flexibility because things do change. So, but if you are going to be constantly changing things all the time, then you're never going to be able to accomplish the 1, 2, or 3, let's say the top 3 things that you've set your mind to, which I think is really, really important. So I would say the ability to prioritize. There are other aspects, of course, that are extremely important, like communication, creativity, listening. There's a lot of other things, but I would say if I had to choose one, I would say the ability to prioritize.
Okay. So all you CMOs out there listening, take Rebecca's word for it. Every morning, first think of your priorities and then run for the day.
Exactly.
So, Rebecca, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll be doing some more of these in the future together. I hope so.
Thank you, Shoham. Thank you for inviting me. This was really enjoyable.
Thank you. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to the B2B Startup Growth Podcast, bringing you the latest wisdom on marketing, sales, growth hacking, and life as a startup leader. I'm your host, Shoham Eckhaus, and if there's a particular topic that you'd like me to cover soon, please reach out to me on b2bstartupgrowth.com and let me know.